All right, welcome back to Genius. So let's dive into React components. Okay, we have been writing some React components already. We have the app. We have used the class way of writing the class component. We have also seen the functional component. But let us get to understand better what React components are. So there are two types of React components. We have the class component and we have the functional component. Okay, so but functional component is the most recommended one. Okay, although the class component also has its own advantages, but basically most of the applications you'll be writing, you'll be using functional components. But for bigger projects, okay, more complicated, more complex projects, you can also use React the class component. So in this session, we'll be talking about class components. Okay, we still want you to understand what class components are, how to create them in case you found any reason to use class component. So we'll start with class component, then later on we'll now talk about functional components. Okay. So React components are the building blocks of any React application. Okay, we already know that every React application starts with just one component that will not have children. Okay, so a component can have children like that. That's how you build the full application. So your full application is just one component. Okay. Then they are reusable, they are independent pieces of UI that help manage the complexity of an application. So every particular component is actually reusable. We can reuse them. They are also independent pieces of UI. A button on Facebook, a button on Facebook is an independent piece of UI. That their job is to just display something that looks like a button. Okay, so components are reusable and independent pieces. Every component has its job, and its job is to display a particular UI. Okay, so the big picture of your application is your first component, which is going to display all the user interface of your application. Then for each part of this your user interface, you now have different components there. Okay, so class components in React were the primary way of writing components before React is 16.8 introduced functional components with hooks. Before functional components were created, class component was the primary way of writing components. So while modern React development favors functional component, it's still important to understand class components, especially when working with older code bases. Okay, now it there's no knowledge is a waste. And when you understand these things, even understanding functional components will be easier. So we are going to dive into class components. Then later on, we'll talk about functional components. Okay. So class components, what is a class component? A class component is a JavaScript class that extends React.component and includes a render method that returns JSS. First of all, it is a JavaScript class. Okay, like I told you before you even come into this taking this class, you should have taken our JavaScript for beginners class and also JavaScript mastery class. So that is where we also teach you class component. So now that's where we teach you classes in JavaScript. So this class component is just an ordinary JavaScript class that extends, okay, that inherits from React.component. When we are talking about the React object, we taught you the React.component, and that is the base class. That's the base class of React class component. So it extends it, and again, it now includes a render method. This render method can return JSS, or it can even return React.createElement if you don't want to use JSS. Okay, so you can actually return React.createElements. So unlike functional components, class components can maintain state and use lifecycle methods. So this is basically where class components, in case you want to maintain, although functional components still give you a way of maintaining state, but lifecycle methods is another session we are going to have after this one. Okay, so with lifecycle methods, you can do a lot with class component. So in as much as functional components are the preferred way of writing components now, but in case you find yourself trying to make use of these lifecycle methods, class components will be the best option. So class components are ES6 classes that extend React.component. Okay, they allow state management and lifecycle methods for complex UI logic. So when you're writing a complex application, a complex React application, the class components will come handy. So they are used for stateful components before hooks. Okay, they are called smart components because they are used for stateful components. Functional components are mostly called stateless components. And basically, although we still use hooks now to manage state in functional components, but class components are basically amazing when you're working with stateful components. Okay, so they support lifecycle methods for mounting, updating, and unmounting. So in the next section, we'll talk about these lifecycle methods. But for now, let's go and understand how to create class components. Let's understand props and let's understand state of components. So React components, um, it must have this return method. It is a required thing that the class component must have a render method. Sorry, not return method. It must have a render method. And this render method in React class component, they return JSS describing the UI of the application. So when you want to, you already know that components, their job is to describe the user interface of the application, whether it is the main one or the children. Okay, their job is to just describe the UI. So this is how you create a class component. You use the keyword class, it is required, then the name of your component, in this case it is app, then it extends react.component, and it must have this render method. If it doesn't have this render method, it will not display anything. Okay, it must have this render method, which this render method must return a JSS or the react.create element. So let's go to code. When we were talking about Babel, we started this application where we installed Babel, we installed React, and we installed React DOM. Then we now installed Passo for our bundling. Okay, so basically it is a lightweight example that I'm doing, a lightweight project I'm doing, so I'm still using that particular one. Because if you have forgotten how to do this, please go back to the Babel class. All right. So now, I have of course, I have set up my stuff. This is my HTML. I have my root element, and I have my script here. All right. So in this index.js is where I'm creating the whole thing, and I'm importing this app. So this app that I'm importing, this is it here. This app is my root element. So from here, I can now have children element. So basically, what I can do here is this. I can do something like this. I can say return, and I'm returning a div. Okay, I will now say h1 hello React. Okay, then if I save this, okay, this is our root element. All right, this is our root element. If I save this and go to my terminal and run nps passo index.html, my application would start running. It's coming up. So it is available now on localhost 1234. So I'll go to my browser. Okay, and I will enter localhost 1234. All right. So I have Hello React here. So the thing is that is my main application. I can have other components that can be the children. So let me go and create okay, let me go and create a child component here. Let me just create another component. I'll create another component. I will call it let me just call it child.js. So I'm going to say I'm still going to use I'm creating a class component. So I'm going to say class, all right. Then I'll call it child component. That is the name. So this is the syntax, and sorry, it's not extends, it extends. I can say component like this, and I will import it. So it's either I use react.component or I import it like this. Either ways. Okay. And then I will now it must have the render method. It must. And this render method must return either a JSS, I like showing you all the options that you need to know. It can return a JSS or it can return React. It can return create element from React. All right, I have imported it from React. So create element. I can actually say react.create element, or I can just do create element and import it. If you want to import something, if you write out this thing like this, just make sure your mouse is immediately after whatever you're writing. Hold Control Space. You can see, because it has been imported already, okay, let me show you something. Okay, let me take this thing off and just show you something. I could just say React dot component and I will not have any issues. But if I don't want to do that, since I have written component like this, I can just take my mouse over to the last after the T. I'll just say control space. I'll hold my control button and hit space. Then it will not give me option. You can see it has given me option. Where do you want to import this thing from? I will select the first one because I want to import it from the React library. So I hit enter. I can take my mouse back to the create element. All right, control space. It gives me the option again. I hit enter. So it has imported it. So I can actually do this. Instead of returning JSS, I can return a div, all right? And I can have null attributes. I just want to refresh your memory because sometimes these things are good to also know. And I want to return a child element. So I could just say the child element could be something like hello child. This is one way of doing it, okay? But then I have to export default. Okay, so if I save it now, I can go back to the app.js and I can make this thing, I can put this child component under here. I can say child, you see, it's giving me the option. So child component, I just hit enter and I close it. Sorry, I close it like this. So when I save it, all right, Paso has rebuilt this whole thing. I'll go back to the browser and I will see it. Hello, child. Amazing. Okay, so but I wasn't using JSS. JSS is we'll have a separate session where we discuss about JSS. But I can still go back instead of using the create element, I can just return a JSS. Okay, so I just want you to have these options. Okay, I just want you to have these options. I can say hello child here. I just want you to have these options. Okay, so since I'm no longer using the create element, I can take it out. All right, so everything works fine. This thing is being rebuilt and we got it back. So if I go back to the browser, everything is cool. All right, so let's get back to, so you see how we created the class. Okay, this is how we create. We have the, of course, the export default is a different thing. We are using it to export it so that we can have it in another modules. Okay, so we are saying class, then the name of the class extends this component that is coming from React. Then it must have a render method. It's a required field, a required method. It must have it. Then I can now come in here and use it as a child of this parent element. Now, this app component is our main component that we are using here. We are using here. So this is what we are rendering. So we are rendering the app component, which is the parent one. So every other thing would be inside of this app and they will be displayed in the UI. Okay. So this is how you create a class element, a class component. Okay. So you can actually do export default from here, or you can do it from here. So let me show you. If I don't want to export default from here, all right, I can actually take it out like this, but I prefer using this one. I can take it out and I'll come under like this. Oops, sorry. I can cut it, then I'll come under here and I'll say export default, and the name of this thing is child component. So this is also valid. Fine, nothing happens. All right, everything is built. Look at our built, the message. Everything is okay, no error. Okay, so you said that for me, I prefer using export default right up on top of here. Okay, but you can also do it this way. Anyone that works for you. All right. So what about a component constructor? You know that classes have constructors, and a class constructor is the first place initialization is done. So initialization of your props, initialization of your state, they are done here. So the constructor initializes the state and binds methods. Okay, they always call super prop because this our component is extending a a base component. So we must have to call the super props like this. Okay, so this is how you create a constructor. So let's say we'll talk about props later on. So inside here, I have to create a constructor. This it is not compulsory actually, but if you ever have some things to initialize while your component is being created, you have to do it here. So, but first of all, you must call the super method of the base class. Then you can do any other thing you want to do here. So this is basically where initialization is done. If I save it here, go back to our browser, everything is fine. We are good. Okay. But the thing is that we'll talk about props and state later on. Okay. We'll talk about props and state later on. So now, when we talk about props, I'm going to explain what we have here. Okay. So this is the constructor. The constructor of your component is where the initialization is done. So this initializes the component states and their props too. So I don't want to talk about state yet. We want to talk about it, I'll talk about it, okay? So it is required when you're using state or binding methods. All right. This constructor is required when you're using state or your binding method. So let's talk about props in class components. What are props? Props allow data to flow from parents to child components, and they are accessible via this.props. Okay? Props allow when you want to pass data from a parent component to a child component, you use props. Now that we have props they are read-only values. You cannot change them. They are read-only values from the parent to the component. Okay, they are immutable. They are immutable in class components. You are not supposed to be changing props. So let's go back and let me explain this thing. Now we have this child component and we are using it as a child of this parent. The parent component here is the app. Okay, so this is the child. So if you want to pass any value from the parent to the child, we are going to use the props object. Okay, but for now we are not passing any property here. So if I go back to the child, let's access this. We have seen that you access it using the this.props. So let's access it. Let me do something. Uh, let me do something before I. Okay, if I say console.log and I will say this dot props. Let's go and see what we have. I hope we don't get any error. Let's go and see what we have. This is going to be an empty object. The initial value of props is always an empty object. So if I go back to the browser and there's no error, then I expect to go to my console. You see, it's an object and it is empty. It is an empty object. Okay, so this prop is an empty object. Why? Because we didn't pass any, we have not passed any property yet. So if I go back to code, all right, here we have empty object. But if I go back and say I want to pass some value from the parent to the child, I could come here and say, okay, I could say I want to pass in name. Okay, I will say name is equal to James. All right. So right now I have passed a property. I have passed a property from the parent to the child element. So if I save it now, go back to browser. All right. You can see now we have an object that has name inside of it. So this is how you pass values from parent to objects, from parents to children. So if I go back, let me show you again. You pass, is it possible that this particular value could come from maybe we are reading data from the database or we are getting it from wherever we are getting it. We could just say the user's first name is equal to James. Okay, so what's the problem here? Oops, sorry. No, we can't do this. This is a class. Sorry, I thought I was using a functional component. We can't do this here. Okay, so if you want to do anything with the props like this, you would have to use the constructor function. So here we can actually go back and say constructor, okay, um, Okay, sorry, I don't even need a constructor. Sorry about that. Okay, I could just create a variable here, a private a field or a property here for the class. I could just say this, even if I don't use this, I could just say first name. I could just say first name is equal to James. Okay, you see there's no error here now. So instead of passing this James here, I can just say name is equal to, then I'll use this expression here and I'll pass in first name. All right, so I have passed a value from the parent to the child. So this is how, these props, they are like attributes in HTML. All right, these props, they are like attributes in HTML. Do you understand? These props, they are like, I look at the way I put it, but it always has its own syntax when it comes to a JSS like this. So name is equal to, I'm not using this dot first name, okay? Because for me to access this first name, I have to use this keyword. So if I save it, go back to the browser, you see, um, okay, yes, it's name, we called it name, and our name is James, okay? But since we have been able to pass some data from the parent to the child, if we want to access it, how do we access it? Already we have it here. We're already using saying this dot props, okay? Since we have this dot props here, so we can also have access to the child. So we can say hello child. We can say hello child. Your name is, we now say um, this dot props dot name. So if you want to access props of a component, you have to use especially when you're working with class component, you use this dot props. So then you now use the name of the field of that object. Okay, so we have seen that we have, when we did console.log this.props, we had name as one of the fields of that object, properties of that object, so we can actually have access to it. So here we were able to pass data from the parent to the child. All right. As we passed it here, just look at the way it is being done. Okay. Practice it. As we pass it, then we can come to the child component and we can use it here. So when I save this thing, go back to the browser, we can see that, hello child, your name is James. Do you understand? So this is how you pass props. You use props to pass data from parent to a child component. Okay, please, if you don't still understand this, then reach out to us so that we can explain better. Okay, we can do a video call, we can do a voice call to explain more to you. Okay, so of course we expect that this is going to be hard for you. We expect that you might not understand all these things. So that is why you need to reach out to us. We promise you we give you personal coaching and mentoring. So reach out to us in case you find anything confusing. So I go back to my slide. Okay, so you cannot change props. So if I go back and say, okay, I got some props from the parent and I want to change it here. If I come here and say, um, if I come here and say this dot props um, is equal to, okay, sorry, if I want to do that, I will have to use it inside. So if I come and say this dot props, if I want to use the props outside of this function, I will have to initialize it in the constructor. I'm coming to show you that. If I say this dot props is equal to, or I say this dot props dot name is equal to hello, we are going to have an error. We are going to have an error in the browser. You cannot change. You see, we have an error. You say you cannot, this dot props is a read-only object, so you cannot change it. You can't. So that's why you have this error. You can't change it. So don't you ever try to change props. This prop, don't ever try to change it. So if you want to, for any reason, you want to make use of the props object in your constructor, all you have to do is to put it as make sure you have props inside here and make sure you also have props here. So you're getting the props from the constructor of React to put the props in the constructor like this, then you initialize it here, and then you can make use of it. You can now say this dot props. Okay, but if you try to actually do anything here, there will be a problem. You cannot change it. You cannot change it. So in case you want to make use of this dot props, you have to actually initialize it in the constructor like this. Once you put it as a parameter in the constructor, make sure you pass this parameter as an argument to the super function of your base component. Okay, so this is basically what we have to do about props. You pass in props from parent component to child component, and this is how you can make use of it. All right. So you can see we have this greet method, and we were able to make use of the prop, this dot props dot name. So this is the same thing we did in the other one. All right, so what about state? Now, since we cannot change our props, now if a parent object passes a value to us, to a child object, if a parent object passes a value to a child component, if a parent component passes a value to a child component, the child component cannot change that value. So what happens if the child component wants to make some changes based on its own logic? So if you want to do some changes, you want to change some data so that the user can always see it, you would have to use state. So the thing is this, when a state is just the overall data of your application. State is an object that hosts component specific data that can change over time. Props cannot change, but state can change. So let me show you something. If I go on and say console.log and I say this keyword here refers to this particular class, this particular component. So if I say this, let's go and see what we have. We will see props and we will see state. So the this contains state and props. Okay, this is the child component. You can see it has props, it has state. All right, it has props and it has state. Okay, so now the props we have as an object, and right now we have not initialized the state, so it is null. But when you initialize the state, it will be an empty object. If you don't initialize it, we have not initialized it here, that is why it's null. But whenever we initialize it in the constructor, it's going to be an object. So if I go back, if I go back and say this dot state, the initialization is going to be an empty object. So if I now go back to the browser again, now our state has changed from being null to an object. All right, it's not an object. I have initialized it. Before then, I didn't initialize it. So in your constructor, that is where you initialize your state. Okay. So state is an object that hosts component-specific data that can change over time. So if your component has some data that you need that can change, and whenever it changes, you want the user to see the change, you have to put it in state. So that is what we use state for. So state is an object that determines the component's behavior and rendering. So the state of a component determines the behavior. Like now, I can say the state of a button is the color of a button is red, the text of that button is click me. So these are the states. Okay, state is a particular the properties of a particular component at a given time. It can change. And whenever it changes, React will re-render, will call that render method to change to run, and the component will be re-rendered. So you use set states to update the state. You don't just update the state directly. Okay, so how do you initialize state? You see, here we have this class counter extends component. We have the constructor, and inside the constructor, we are initializing some state. So we have a state here called count. Okay, so let's go and do some coding here. So in this our state, we want to have our initial state is going to be, let's say, what do we work now? Okay, let's say state we will have Um, I want to do something that is not just count. Okay. Hello, your name is this. So if you want to change this name, okay, if you want to change this, and this is what we will do. We will come and say name is this dot props. So the initial value of this our name is the value of this dot props dot name. All right, so that's the value. So we can come here and instead of using the props here, we can now say we are going to use state dot name. All right, so look at what we did. Because we cannot change the value that the parent component has given us, all right, we cannot change it. So what we can do is that we can create a state called name, and then we will now initialize it to be the value that the parent is giving us in the props. So if I save this thing, we'll still have the same thing, no problem. All right, it's still James. But what if we want to change it? How do we do it? Now, let's say, hello, your name is James, is name. And we can now say, um, we can have an input element here. Okay. And we will have the event handler. I don't want to, we'll still talk about event handlers in we'll talk about event handlers in components in React, okay? So I can just say, okay, I could just have another method here, and I will say handle name change, okay? I'm trying to update the change. So I can say this is a method, it's a functional method, for an arrow function that, okay, it takes the text, it takes the value, okay, and then when I do this, I can say, um, if I want to make changes to this state, I will use set state. Do you understand? And if I use set state, I'll pass in a new object. So I will now say name is equal to value. So what I'm doing here is this. I am passing, maybe we should just change this thing to first name so that we will not have issues with this JavaScript name stuff. So we change it to first name, okay? And I will also change it here. Okay, so here, I will give this handle, okay, let me make this thing more clearer. This is going to take an event. This function will take an event, and then we will take we'll say event dot target dot value. So whatever is the value of this event, the target of this event, we are passing it to this first name. So I can now say, I can now call handle change like this and pass the event. But this event is, I'm going to get it from here. Don't bother about event handling for now. We'll talk about that. But I just want to show you how you can make changes. Oops, so this is not equal. It's supposed to be like this. So look at what I'm doing here. We want to make changes to this our name that the parent is giving us. So how do we do it? First of all, we'll create a state. We'll say this dot state, and we pass in the first property of this. We say first name, okay, is equal to is this dot props dot name. So we are assigning whatever the parent is giving us to this first name field, and then that is what we are now using here. We are saying, hello child, your name is this. So now, whenever the user types in something into here, all right, we will call this handle name change function, and this whole thing will be called. Inside of this function will take the event, okay, that is being handled here, and then we are changing the first name to the value that this target have. Don't worry, we'll talk about event handling, and of course, you're supposed to know what we mean by event.target.value. We have talked about DOM manipulation, okay, in JavaScript. So if I do this thing and save it now, so go back to the browser. So we now have a text field. So if I go and say John, you can see the James have changed. So this is the only way you can actually make use of your this is how you can change values in your React. Okay, so you will not. Okay, let me put a placeholder here. Let me say placeholder, change your name. Change your name. Okay. Maybe I can put a break here so that this guy comes down. I can put a break here, and when I go back to the browser, the initial name is James. So if you want to make changes to this James, to this value, remember, this James is coming from this.state.first name. So if you want to make changes to your data, now this James, this first name belongs to the child component. It is the child component's property. So if you want to make change, if you want to make some changes, you use the state. So that's what we are doing here. So if I go and say James, if I go on and say John, all right, you can see John Doe, it is changing immediately. And if I remove everything, it will not be empty. Okay, so this is how you do changes. You change your state. Okay, something came to my mind. I just forgot. I wanted to chip in something, but I just forgot now. Okay, so this is how you make changes. Okay, so we have an event handler here, and we are putting it here. Don't worry, we'll talk about how React handles events, how React handles event. Okay, but this is how you make changes to your state. If you want, whenever your component has a state that can change, and then there's another thing I want to let you know. Whenever the state changes, React calls this render method. And it is the render method that will now re-render. Remember, we talked about React has the virtual DOM. It uses the virtual DOM, not the real DOM. So whenever there are updates in the state, that is what we just did, and there is an update in the state. What did React do? React would re-render this. So if I go on and say console.log, all right, and I'll just say re-render, re-rendered. Okay, so the first time, of course, the first time this component is rendered, this function will call. So you see, this is the first time whenever it is mounted. Okay, the first time this component was created, it is called it called this for rendered. If I go on and make change to the state, now look at it. If I do BIM, you can see. So every time there is a change in the state, that render method will be called. Look at it. I'm typing, the more I'm typing, you can see the number is increasing 7, 8, 9, 10. You understand? So every time this whole thing will be re-rendered. Okay, so as we go on to explain life cycles of a component, there are some things we're going to explain to you how you can make this thing not to re-render at every single time. But notice that every time you make change to the state, React would look at the virtual DOM, compare it, and see that okay, the virtual DOM is different from what it has already before. It will make that change, and whenever it makes that change, it will re-render. It will re-render that component. So components are always re-rendered. The first time the component mounts, the first time the component is created, then anytime there is change in the state, the re-render method would always be called. So that's what I want to show you here. Okay. In case you have any confusion, please always reach out. Always reach out. Okay. All right. So that's what we have here. So we have seen how to change some state. Okay. So updating state, you should always use modified. State should never be modified directly. I just told you. Don't try to say, don't try to say instead of using this dot state, you now go on and say this dot state is equal to. No, you don't do this. Don't do this, please. All right. Always use the set state method. That is what it was created for. Always use the set state method. So whatever you put in here, all right, the set state method would either add this key value pair to the object, or if that property already exists, it will update it. Okay, that's basically what it does. Okay, so you can see we have this counter method. That's exactly what I have just shown you. Instead of doing counter method, what we did was we we changed the name. Okay, so important to note, set state updates are asynchronous. Set state updates are asynchronous. So sometimes you might not be getting what you expected. So one thing to always do is always use callback forms to update your set state. Let me show you. Instead of us updating this whole thing like this, what we could do is that we could use the callback form. All right. When I say callback, when I do this thing, okay, so this is the callback form. This is just a callback, an arrow function. This arrow function will have the previous state as an argument. All right, so you can have access to it here. So instead of me to just do this, I can just say, I can now say, I'm returning an object. I'm saying first name, and I will say, um, first name, then event dot target dot value. So in case I still want to make use of this previous state, I can actually still use it. Okay. Oh, so no, 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 no. I'm not returning. I should be returning an object. This is not an object, sorry. Yes. I hope I am correct. I don't think my syntax, my code is cool. I don't think so. I don't think so. Okay. There's no error. Okay, see, it's not working. I got it wrong there. Okay, let me check out something. Previous. Okay. Oh, sorry. I've seen where I got the error. Okay. So I should be returning on a. I can do this. Then I do this dot. I do this. Okay. There's an error. Okay, so let me do some, let me change everything here. This is my state method, and then I could actually have the previous state to point to return this expression. And inside this expression, I can just return this and to be first name, to be event dot target dot value. Okay, so I hope I get it this time around. Okay. All right. All right. So it was from my syntax. So it is fine now. Okay. So always try to use this callback form to change your state to avoid unnecessary unnecessary expectation, things you didn't expect. Okay. So this does state. Okay. If I want to make use of this previous, I can just say, in case I want to make use of this previous, this previous is actually the previous state. So I can say first name is equal to previous dot first name. Okay, I can say this previous dot first name. Oops, sorry. Okay, I could just do a template literal here, and um, I will say this, and I will say previous dot first name. Okay, then I could give a space, and then I will also do this. I don't need to explain my code here. Okay, I'm using template literal. You already know what template literal is. So what I'm doing here is that whatever I get from this, from whatever I'm typing into the input element, I'm concatenating it with what they have already. So if I go and save, go to my browser, I still have my James. So I can just say James Doe. You can see it's been appended. Oops. Okay, because this is always called at every given time. Okay, so I just have to change it's just from my code. So, but you understand what I'm trying to do here. So you can always have access to this previous, this is the previous state. You can always have access to it. Okay, so I'm not going to go ahead to make my corrections. I could just go back and what I wanted to play with didn't give me exactly what I wanted. So we can actually still go with this. Okay, so if I go back, and then I can type and it changes. Okay. So I don't have time to go and start looking at my logic. The first one I did, I didn't get was, but my point here is this: you will always have access to the previous state. So if I try to say previous, I can just say, okay, if I try to do this, sorry. Okay, so look at what I'm trying to do. Instead of doing this, I can just, um, okay, I can just return, return an object like this. Okay, and this comes here. Okay, and this comes here. All right, so this still works. Fine, perfect, it works. Okay, so I can go and I make my changes, it works. But this is what I want to show you. I want to show you that this you can have access to the previous state and do whatever you want to do with it. So I can just say console.log. So if I say console.log, this previous, okay, let me use a better name. I can say prev state. Okay, you know that this is the previous state that we are talking about. So if I go on and print it, you can have access to it and do whatever you want to do with it. So if I save it, go to the browser, go to the console. All right. So as I type in, you see we have the previous state here. So if you want to make use of it and do whatever you want to do, it's up to you. Okay. But you have access to it. So always use the callback form to update your state using the test state. There's something we also call conditional rendering. Okay. You render the component or you render a particular piece of UI based on true or false expression. Okay. Let's say we have this render method to check if a user is logged in or not. If the user is logged in, we say welcome, the name of the user. If the user is not logged in, we render another thing. So let's go on and do something cool. Okay, so we'll still continue with this because we want to say hello. So we are going to now say hello, James. Okay, we are going to say hello, James. So if James is logged in, we'll say hello, James. Okay. So, but what we are going to do here is this. I'm going to have another state. I will add another state inside that state object. I will say logged, logged in, but I will initialize it to be what? False. Okay. So, if I want to do conditional rendering, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to return. There are different ways to actually do this, okay? I could, inside this my render method, okay? I could say, um, if, I could say if state, sorry, if this does state, of course I can still use state here, even without, I could say state, okay, this does state dot logged in. If it is true, then I want to return, hello. I want to return this. Don't worry, I'm going to fix my code, okay? Don't worry, don't panic, don't panic, don't panic. All right. Okay. Oops. If this return div, why am I having this error here? Hello. Okay. First of all, let me take these ones out. Div. Oops, sorry. I'm not supposed to do this yet. Okay, so if the user is logged in, I'm going to return this. Else, if the user is not logged in, I will say, hello, stranger. Okay, if the user is logged in, I will say hello, the name of the user. But if the user is not logged in, I will say hello, stranger. But look at our condition here. Our condition says if the state.loggedin is true, of course, initially it is false. Okay, initially it is false. So we'll say if it is true, we'll render hello the name. But if it is false, we'll say hello stranger. So which one do you think is going to render? Hello stranger we're going to render because our logged in is, so you can say hello stranger was rendered. Okay, this is conditional rendering. This is called conditional rendering. So what we can also do here is this. We could have a button. We could have a button. We could say, remember, this is just the normal HTML that I'm writing here. I can here come here and say I'll have a button. And this button, on the click of this button, I will just say, I'll just do login. I'll just do login. So on the click of this button, we are going to call a method. Let me bring that method. I will say the method is handle click. Okay. And this method is going to be an arrow function. All right. What it will do is it will just change the state for us. So we are going to say this does set state. Okay, what state do we want to set? Remember, always use the previous state. I can say previous state. And then what am I returning? I'm just returning a new object. I'm returning a new object, and this new object would be, I will say logged in, and I'm just changing the value to be true. So whenever the user clicks this button, handle click, all right? So on the click of this button, we are going to call this handle method, this handle click method. Yeah, you might be saying, how did we say this dot handle method without parentheses? But in the other time, we actually had that parentheses. Don't worry, when we talk about how React handles events, we are going to explain all those things. So right now, when the user clicks on the button, this function will be called. And what does this function do? The function just changes. Oh, I still have this. Sorry, I didn't get this thing right. I should be returning this like this. Okay, so better now. All right. So once this button is clicked, we are changing the state. The only state we want to change here is the logged in. We want to change it from false to true. So if I go on and I go to the browser, we still see hello stranger. We're not asking the stranger, you're logging. If you click on this button, you're going to log in. So if I click on it, bam, you can see it now rendered hello James, because as soon as we clicked on the button, the state changed. We changed the state here. And once any particular state changes, React will call this method again. All right, and once it calls it again, this expression will be evaluated again, and since it is true, this one will be rendered, not this one again. Okay, so that is what we mean by conditional rendering. You will see more of it as we build bigger projects. So advantages of using class components. Number one is it provides access to lifecycle methods. We'll talk about that in the next in subsequent sessions. Okay, we'll talk about the lifecycle methods of class components. It allows for state management without additional libraries. Now, if I don't want to make use of Zostand, Redux, all right, I can actually use class components without having additional libraries, and it will be perfect. So they are still widely used in legacy React projects. Okay, so limitations of class components, they are complex compared to functional components. Okay, but the reason why I am showing you this is that you need to know them. All right, you need to know them. When you know them, you understand better. This keyword can be challenging for beginners. It can only be challenging if you have not taken our JavaScript mastery class. That's where we explain this keyword very well. Functional components with hooks are more performant in many cases. So functional components, we'll talk about that in the next session. They are more performant when they are working with hooks. So step by step, you're going to understand React very, very well, okay? So thank you very much. I'm going to see you in the next section. Make sure you do your test. Make sure you do your assignment. This is time for you to be doing your assignment. If you cannot do those assignments, reach out to us so we can show you how you can do the assignment. Make sure you try your assignments, okay? We'll see you in the next session.